Toasty! It's time to test your might with a brand new episode of the Nerd Byword podcast. In today's episode, we'll discuss the new Mortal Kombat movie and whether it was a flawless victory or brutality against the franchise. Get over here because the Nerd Byword starts now. Welcome, ladies and gentle nerds, to a new episode of the Nerd Byword podcast. I'm Dave, here with my fellow nerd and co-host Kris, and we're excited you decided to join us this week. Today, we'll dive deep into the new Mortal Kombat movie. But first, it's time for some nerd news. Kris, finish him.
Well, we were kind of juiced up last week with my news segment, but it was a little bit slim pickings this week, so I kind of went on brand. We're talking about Mortal Kombat. And there are some rumblings that NetherRealm, the developer of the Mortal Kombat series and the Injustice series, for Warner, could be developing a Marvel fighting game. Insider Daniel Rickman claims that NetherRealm has a Marvel fighting game currently in production. Now, this is a lot of just whispers and speculations, and, I've got an inside knowledge, unconfirmed sources. So take all of this with an extremely small grain of sand, but as the internet and social media is wont to do, the speculation has run rampant now. So I've seen everything on Twitter from a Marvel versus DC fighting game, an Injustice style game, basically just copied and pasted, but with Marvel characters. Now, with that being said, Marvel video games outside of the Spider-Man, games for Sony has been quite a bit lacking and underperforming in recent years. I've had my criticisms of Marvel Ultimate Alliance 3 in recent episodes. I've given it another shot and I've kind of figured it out, but the difficulty settings really are a turnoff to me. Marvel's Avengers, even though I liked large portions of it, has hilariously underperformed sales-wise. And Marvel vs. Capcom Infinite was a big dud. So whether or not this is true, my hope as a Marvel fan is that we really get some juice in the video game end of Marvel, because it feels like a lot of resources are in these free-to-play games for mobile devices, and not enough focus has been centered on console video games. So here's hoping that we get, more juice into this aspect of the Marvel fandom and some really worthwhile video games.
Yeah, I'd be shocked, I say, if this is really happening. NetherRealm is owned by Warner Brothers, who famously also own, DC Comics and that whole, pantheon of characters. Doing the Marvel thing would not be exactly on brand. Basically, producing a game for quote unquote the competition. It's fun to speculate, and NetherRealm is obviously one heck of a fighting game developer. And the recent Mortal Kombat games have been a return to form. 10 and 11 have been both really good, and their Injustice series is solid from a gameplay perspective, although me, I hate me a story that features evil Superman, so that's a little disappointing. But would I check this out? Absolutely. I think we're sorely lacking solid Marvel-based video games, except for maybe Spider-Man in recent years, and that's a problem. I'm not quite sure what exactly is going on with video game developers that they can't quite crack a formula for solid superhero-based video games. I'm not sure why Marvel Studios has not been able to leverage the success of the MCU into a solid video game franchise. There's clearly something stopping this from clicking or working. I'm not sure what it is. Obviously, the PlayStation exclusive Spider-Man game is very good, but beyond that, what else do you have? I mean, on the DC side, you have the Arkham games, which have been solid as well, but you don't get much further than that. And you look at the MCU and how they're bringing all these fantastic characters in, and bringing them really into the popular conversation in some of the cases for the very first time. but they can't leverage those same characters into good video games. I find that surprising and disappointing, basically. So do I think this particular thing is happening? I don't know, man. I'd be pleasantly surprised, Chris.
I think so too. Now, as we sit here and I think of when you mentioned Warner Brothers, I keep thinking back to the Warner Brothers logo flashing up with the Lego Marvel games. Which, here's the sad state of Marvel video games: the best Marvel video games by far are the Lego Marvel games. So, but those are developed as an under tertiary company or whatever, a subsidiary, there's the word, subsidiary of Warner Brothers as well. So it was a bit jarring, like firing up the, Lego Marvel Superheroes 2 and seeing the Milano and then all of a sudden a WB logo. And I was like, that doesn't seem right. So it's been done before, but I don't know if lightning is going to strike twice here.
Can we just admit that the more interesting part of this, besides the video game development, is simply the notion of a Marvel versus DC video game? Am I the only one who misses the heyday of Marvel and DC actually cooperating with each other and doing all these crossovers in the 90s? You have Marvel versus DC, you have the Amalgam comics, and then all these different one-shots they did, Batman and Captain America, Batman and Daredevil, Superman and Hulk. I mean, this mid to late 90s heyday where the two companies actually were willing to cooperate. Boy, I miss that. I would love to see, with what we have today, the characters, the state of the characters, and how the writing has changed, how the art even has changed since the 90s, and see, some of today's top talent do some crossover stuff even in the comics. That would be something I'd be much more interested in at this point.
I totally agree, and it's funny that you say that because you have things like that happening, with Image Comics, but it doesn't happen a lot between the big two in recent years, and it's really puzzling because you have, creators, and it feels so like encamped with the big two, even though you have creators going back and forth. You have Tom Taylor writing for both, you have Matthew Rosenberg writing for both. It's just really, really crazy when you have people going back and forth. Like, think about what a big win that would be, how that would fly off the stands. I mean, you even had like some mild success with the Warner Brothers books, the DC books with Bugs Bunny teaming up with, DC superheroes and like Elmer Fudd, Martian Manhunter, or something like that. Some of those crazy team up books. They've done, and Warner has leaned into like their own content with like Scooby-Doo and stuff like that. And then you have these branch overs with Batman, the Ninja Turtles. I mean, like, why not just like think about like how that would fly off the shelves? I know I'd be first in line.
Yeah, I would be too, Chris.
All right, Dave. I saw this news story and I sent it to you, and then we both just had like a freak out moment for a minute. What are you talking about this week?
So to quote George Takei for a moment, oh my. So we finally caught a glimpse of Miss Marvel, and we really need to talk about it. Now, longtime listeners of the pod know I'm a huge fan of Miss Marvel's character. I love her comic series, and I'm specifically referring here to the Kamala Khan version of the character, who last year basically stole my heart as I got caught up on her adventures. She really filled a void in my comic reading life and reminded me of this, bright, optimistic, never say die Stephanie Brown Batgirl run by Brian Q. Miller over on DC's side that I adored so much. I think there are some personality similarities between those two characters that made it very easy for me to enjoy Miss Marvel series. So the announcement that the character would be getting her own Disney Plus series and a prominent role in the upcoming Captain Marvel 2. Oh, Chris, that was exciting. And now set photos have revealed Miss Marvel in all her costumed glory as portrayed by Iman Vellani. And holy crap, it's comic book accurate. And I can't complain too much about the MCU's costumes because they're generally cool, but they're not usually what I would call comic book accurate. There are a lot of compromises made in trying to translate some of these costumes to live action. And I know there's a contingent of fans who a bit snobbishly honestly claim that comic book accurate costumes can't work in live action. And to that I say, have you seen Chris Reeves as Superman? So I'm thrilled beyond compare that Miss Marvel looks like she literally leapt off the page. It's easily the most accurate MCU costume to date. It looks amazing. It features, I believe, the first domino mask of the MCU, which is incredibly difficult to believe as well. It's really everything I hoped for in this particular costume. So I am psyched beyond compare for this Disney Plus series. It is probably my most anticipated MCU based series coming to Disney Plus. I am so over the moon about this one, Chris.
Yeah, absolutely. And like, can we talk about how pitch perfect the casting is of Iman Vellani? Like, this is a virtual unknown. This is going to be her on-screen debut, and they just picked this out like out of a needle in a haystack. And just like those little set photos, usually I don't put too much stock into set photos, like they're grainy or whatever, but this was a pretty clear photo and really high quality. And she just looks perfect. I love she's like tiny and spunky. Like, I'm so excited for this. She looks pitch perfect for this role. As far as the costume goes, it kind of gives me shades of one of the uniforms from Marvel's Avengers game that I just referenced a few moments ago. So like, I just love this. And I mean, and I know it's live action versus animation. It's quite different, but like one of my favorite superhero movie of all time is Into the Spider-Verse. And that was a love letter to comic books. I mean, from the animation, just, swinging off and on a page, like that was true. Like I said, this is a love letter to comic books, and it was appreciating the medium at its core, and they fully embraced it. So like, for those quote unquote fans that, thumb their noses at comic accurate, depictions, like right there, it's an Oscar winning film, for Pete's sake. So I'm super excited for this. Captain Marvel 2 is shaping up to be one of my most anticipated films as well, because Monica Rambeau really captured my heart in WandaVision, and I didn't get near enough content. So I'm super excited with that film as well.
Yeah, here. Very exciting stuff on the horizon there. All right, that's it for Nerd News. You could say we finished it. After the break, let's talk about Mortal Kombat. Stick around. And we're back with the Byword Big Talk. Today, we're talking about the new Mortal Kombat based on the popular fighting game franchise. Was the movie a hit or a miss? As always, when we dive deep into a movie, Chris and I each select 3 things we liked and 3 things we didn't like about the movie. Chris, I think we should start with the things we liked. What have you got?
All right, so I'm going to fully preface this conversation by stating my, prejudgments very clear. Sub-Zero is by far and away my favorite Mortal Kombat character. So I came to this film really hoping that they did him justice, and I was not disappointed. Joe Taslim as Bihan / Sub-Zero was just perfect. At first, full spoilers. If you have not seen Mortal Kombat, be warned. Pause this, go watch it, and then come back. Sub-Zero, they made him a villain, and I was a little bit, a little bit sad about it, but the way that they did it, they made the baddie a baddie, and he was just incredible in that role. So I was totally cool with it. Like, his powers were awesome. He was so OP. Like, the entire room and world is just frozen in ice whenever he appears. He was incredible. And I must say, I'm for the Lin Kuei. But Scorpion was even better served in this film, even though he didn't have a whole lot of screen time. Hiroyuki Sanada as Hanzo Hasashi / Scorpion was just amazing. Just the fact that they really kind of leaned into that storytelling about, going to hell and coming back. And then, my favorite quote of the film, and I saw this on Twitter, like, I want business cards printed out, and people who have actually printed out business cards with this quote, "I have risen from hell to kill you," is so awesome. And then, like, the final fight, I mean, like, you have the 2 most popular characters from the franchise, and they really did them service here. So as far as, Sub-Zero and Scorpion being well served in this, like, standing ovation for me.
Yeah, I tend to agree. It was disappointing to me that Scorpion didn't have more to do. I'll agree on that. But what was there was absolutely fantastic, and Sub Zero was spot on as well. There was a lot of fun with those characters. The portrayals, the casting was absolutely ingenious. I think, and I think we'll talk more about the cast a little bit later. But full round of applause there to the casting director, because the casting of both Sub Zero and Scorpion were absolutely spot on, Chris.
Yeah, and as you said, we're going to talk a whole lot more about the cast here in a minute, but I could not ask for any more. Dave, what is your first like of this film?
I think what I want to talk about here for a second really ties into your first like, namely, Scorpion and Sub Zero. To me, we have to obviously begin with the opening scene. Those first few minutes taking place hundreds of years ago in Japan. I think that it may be literally the best sequence in the movie. I like the movie overall, and I'll say that, but nothing in it lived up to the awesomeness of the opening scene. The whole Bihan, who becomes Sub Zero, attacking, killing the wife and child of Hanzo Hasashi, who goes on to become Scorpion. That whole sequence was fantastic. It was pitch perfect. It was flawless. It sets the tone of the movie in a lot of ways. It's brutal. It's excellently choreographed. It's action packed. Unlike much of the rest of the movie, though, Joe Taslim and Hiroyuki Sanada managed to infuse the sequence with a lot of emotional weight and gravitas. There's something so heartbreaking as Hanzo Hasashi is dying and he's slowly creeping towards his dead wife and child, and doesn't even quite make it before he passes. I mean, it almost puts a bit of a tear in your eye. And the fighting scenes themselves are absolutely fantastic during this whole sequence. Everything just lands. It's so perfect, the rest of the movie had no chance to live up to it. And at this point, after you watch that opening sequence and then you watch the rest of the movie, it was pretty clear that these were the characters I wanted to follow for the rest of the movie. Regrettably, that did not happen, but I would have loved to watch a movie that was more focused on Hanzo pursuing Sub-Zero and becoming Scorpion in the process, basically sort of an extended revenge flick almost, a Kill Bill set in the Mortal Kombat universe would have been fantastic. I would have much rather seen a movie that continued the trend of the opening scene. I mean, what we got was still fun, but I think it was a lesser version of what this opening sequence promised. What do you think, Chris?
Oh, I wholeheartedly agree. It is far and away the best sequence of the film. I mean, like, of course, it was probably catered to us as the nerds of, Asian history and culture that we are. I mean, even down to my xenolinguistic nerd, like the fact that they're speaking Chinese versus, and I'm not sure if it was Mandarin or Cantonese, but the Chinese versus Japanese dynamic, and he full on just says, "I don't know what you're saying," but like I just absolutely loved it. Like it was so beautifully rendered, and I almost put that as an overarching like in the film. It's just gorgeous. Like the throughout the sequences, the film, but particularly this scene, are just beautifully rendered. And just like leaning so much into that, and it felt like an authentic portrayal, to and a like a tribute to Asian culture and history, and it just breathes authenticity and down to the choreograph of the martial arts fights. The fact that we got a backstory for Scorpion's throwing spear, that it's like a garden hoe, like a garden tiller. I don't know. I'm not a horticulturist, but like the fact that you see him fashioning the spear and like it continues on, and like something you never knew you wanted from Mortal Kombat is the backstory to Scorpion's weaponry. Like I love so much. I could watch this opening scene on a loop forever. Like it's so gorgeous.
And I think it was one of the smartest things about the marketing campaign that they actually released like the first 7 minutes of the movie online before Mortal Kombat actually released on HBO Max and in theaters, because that opening scene promises a lot. Now, whether the movie delivered or not on that promise is up for debate, but that opening sequence, I think, speaks for the movie and does an incredibly good job of getting you hyped for the rest of the story. So, yeah, kudos. The opening scene was perfect, from directing to acting to choreographed. It was just absolutely spot on. All right, Kris, what is your second like of Mortal Kombat?
I thought that the overall cast was incredibly strong, and I liked that when I look at the IMDb page, it's a lot of relative unknowns. There's a lot of that guys like Louis Tan, like I've seen him before, but I'm not sure where. Chin Han is as Shang Tsung. A lot of people wanted to criticize him, but I'm a big fan of his work, even from, as Mr. Lau from the Dark Knight films. He was fantastic in the Marco Polo series. I'm a big fan of his work particularly as a villain. He has that cold, like presence where it's very, very chilling when he's on screen. Um, you know, I feel like that was one of the few carryovers, however, that I did appreciate. Cary Hirioku's Tagawa's portrayal of Shang Tsung. One of the very few things about the '95 film that I love. The actor that portrayed Shang Tsung was just over the top and wonderful, and it was deliciously overacting. But I thought Chin Han did well in this role as well. Like both is good. But I liked seeing a lot when I looked at their bios on IMDb. A lot of these folks are like stunt, people, like that's their background. And I thought that lended itself really well when it came to the choreography and the fight scenes, like the fighting, like what's one of the big things you want in a Mortal Kombat film? Like the fights better be good. Like they have to be well done. And I think casting a lot of people with backgrounds in stunts kind of lends itself to that. And in a lot of these ensemble casts, when you have like big names, you kind of feel to give in to the temptation of like giving them the most screen time. So I'm glad that they kind of went with a lesser known cast, but I feel like far and away the breakaway star from this film, and from what I've seen online, a lot of people's favorite thing about the film is Josh Lawson's portrayal of Kano. Like he was just absolutely magnetic. He stole every scene that he was in. Like he's so funny. He's like it's so hard to believe that you would root for an a-hole like this, like a clearly bad guy. Like no one is surprised when he is still a bad guy, even after all these, attempts to redeem him. He's still a bad guy, but you just can't like not root for this guy because he's such a delicious villain, and the guy is acting his off. Like so, the cast overall, I thought was very, very strong, and particularly Josh Lawson as Kano was just amazing.
Yeah, I can agree with everything you just said about the cast. It was smart to go with mostly unknown. It was incredibly clever to bring that many stunt people in, because the number one focus of a movie like this should obviously be the fights and the choreography. And I do think that a bunch of big name actors in this would have been distracting from what the movie was trying to accomplish. So kudos again to the casting directors. It's absolutely fantastic casting across the board. I will say that a lot of the Outworld stuff did leave me a little bit cold from an acting perspective. I don't know what the issue there was, if there was like not a lot of green screen going on or something. There was not a lot to act against, or I'm not sure. But anytime it flashed over to Outworld, the whole thing just kind of felt a little flat. You did want to spend more time with people like Kano, for example, who absolutely was just rip-roaringly hilarious to watch on screen, and just a blast. So yeah, I can't say much more about that other than to say I agree with you. The casting was very, very smart in this movie.
All right, Dave. So your second I totally agree with, but I saw some criticism of it online, and it made me quite angry. What is your second like of the film?
Oh, Twitter. All they do is whine and moan on there. It's absolutely sad. So yeah, I actually loved Sonya Blade in this movie. Now, for all intents and purposes, to me at least, based on how this movie was structured, she should have been the protagonist, actually. If you remove the cliche of the chosen one, namely Cole, and we'll get to our friend Cole later, there is no reason Sonya couldn't have been the main character. I mean, all of the major beats of the story still stand. I mean, it is her friend who is attacked and, let's say, disarmed.
No. Okay. The dad jokes are strong with you today, my friend.
Well, it's been one heck of a year. What can I say? She's the one who subdues Kano. She persuades him to take her to Raiden's temple. She keeps pushing people to keep fighting, to not give up, and on top of all that, she's clearly the superior fighter compared to several of the so-called champions, having to literally save Cole's booty in the last big fight after having defeated Kano. So she's basically the main character. And if you take Cole out of the equation, I think the movie tightens up, the flow is better, and Sonya makes a much more interesting focal character. I'll also say that Jessica McNamee did a fantastic job in the role, like much of the cast. This should have been her movie. I think this could have been if she were the protagonist, if the focus would have been, on her more, this could have been a breakout role for her. The choice to not make her one of the chosen champions of the Earth Realm at the beginning of the movie seems like a real diss against the character in the movie by far. So yeah, I mean, Sonya Blade was so cool, so in charge, so the character that propelled the action forward, that she should have been the main character of the story, Chris.
Yeah, I totally agree, and I feel like that, and we'll get to old Cole, like poor Cole. We're gonna get pretty brutal when we come to the dislikes, but it feels like there was a lot of mansplaining going on, when it came to this film. Like, she was clearly the more compelling and interesting character. She had more backstory, she had more substance to her character. I mean, I'm really trying not to spoil the next part, but I mean, like, it's really just obvious, like right here in front of you, she's a better fighter. She's much more well equipped to handle all of this. She's more charismatic. She's more like stealthy. She's more, like, she can handle herself better in every aspect that is required in this film. So it was, I saw a lot of bros that were like, she's annoying. I'm like, are you kidding me? So it's just like, so these fragile masculinity boys that are just so threatened by a powerful woman, I don't take their opinion with much credence. No credence at all, in fact. So I really enjoyed Jessica McNamee's portrayal of her and the character as well. I love a badass woman that takes charge. So 3 cheers for Sonya Blade for me.
And there's something so off-putting in that moment where she is, there in Raiden's temple and everybody's trying to unlock their powers. And one of the characters, like, kind of talks down to her and it's like, I'm sorry, you don't have to mark, you need to go over there. And you're literally saying that to, the only female character on the side of the good guys at that point. I'm sorry, we're all special, but you, the female character, go stand over there and do something else. I mean, there was something so tone deaf about that moment in a movie that, as far as, like, representation and stuff goes, actually did a much better job than the original Mortal Kombat. But, more on that later. But, all right, Chris, what's your final like of the movie?
All right, so I was a little bit disappointed. I was excited when the first trailer for this movie dropped, but I felt that it was missing something, and it was that iconic Mortal Kombat theme music. And I was happy to see that they did a lot of riffs off of it, kind of like remixes, if you will, with that. But even like other songs, I felt like the music, it may have been overdone in a lot of, in some parts, but a lot of it, like, it really kind of added to the scenes and the fighting in particular. And I'll go back to it, but, like, particularly the music in that opening scene, it really just lends itself and really gets your testosterone or your endorphins flowing, and you're ready to, like, jump off the couch and, throw your back out doing some martial arts move yourselves. But, like, I really enjoyed the score and the soundtrack for this film.
Yeah, this is hot take theater with that nerd Dave, apparently. But I'm just going to say that I'm not as enamored with the quote-unquote iconic music of the original Mortal Kombat movie. Chalk it up maybe to the fact that I grew up in Europe, where that kind of, driving techno beat was all over the place during my childhood and almost impossible to escape. But it didn't quite sing to me the way, you know, a lot of other scores do. And I'm a huge fan of movie music as far as like, you know, classical music style compositions, you know, full orchestra stuff. I think movies and video games are pretty much where it's at right now to get, you know, good new takes on that kind of music. So, you know, this driving techno thing didn't do all that much for me. So I think, you know, in a lot of places this score actually worked a little bit better for me. Maybe I'm just, when it comes to movie scores, a little bit of a traditionalist, but I like me some good orchestral music. I think it sets a different kind of tone than, you know, driving techno beats. So I was pleased with this soundtrack, even though, you know, it's still occasionally riffed off of that whole techno thing to kind of pull on our nostalgic heartstrings. When it comes to that iconic Mortal Kombat music, I can take it or leave it, Chris.
I can't disagree with that. That makes a whole lot of sense. Now, Dave, your final like was almost on my list, so I was glad to see you add it. What is your third and final like for this film?
All right, so let's talk about Lord Raiden for a second, because from the moment he appeared in the opening sequence of the movie, I had to cheer. The Japanese Thunder God was portrayed by a Japanese actor, namely Tadanobu Asano, and that's pitch perfect casting. His performance as Raiden was spot on for what I expected from the character. Now, why is this such a big deal? Well, in the first Mortal Kombat movie, Raiden was played by the Highlander himself, Christopher Lambert. Now, I liked his performance just fine in that movie, and frankly, I liked the actor. I adore the first Highlander movie in particular, and he was fantastic in that role. But doesn't it seem a little odd that a Japanese deity would be, well, a cracker? Why not a Japanese actor? It seems such an obvious choice. So I'm thrilled that this was rectified in the new movie. I loved the performance, the presence of Raiden in this movie, and it's hard to argue with such fantastic casting. So yeah, I'm glad they fixed this particular problem and actually went with a Japanese actor for what is supposed to be a Japanese character. Chris, what do you think?
Yeah, you know, this is one of my calling cards. I like authenticity when it comes to culture and representation. And it just blows my mind that people would be critical of something like this because it's too quote unquote woke or something like that. But I mean, for Pete's sake, like it's a Japanese god. I mean, like there's not a lot that you can say about it. I mean, like it just makes logical sense. Like we've had so much whitewashing in you know Hollywood for so many decades. I was so relieved to see him show up in that opening sequence, and I also love the actor's portrayal. Period, just that quiet strength, like not being overly showy with his powers. You know, kind of being reductivist. You know, kind of methods like I can't interfere. I really just like that. You know, kind of method acting when it comes to it. So I really enjoyed the performance, but overall, this was justice being served.
Absolutely, Chris. I wholeheartedly agree. Which brings us then to our dislikes. And I think this one's going to get a little ugly. So, Chris, introduce us to your first dislike.
Oh, God. Okay, so the one name that I recognized from the casting list, other than Chin Han, was Louis Tan. I was like, but it wasn't one of those like, I know that guy and I've watched everything. I've heard his name before. And other than being like eye candy for a lot of the internet, like, this was really a disappointing portrayal. Your main character of Cole Young was just a disappointment. It felt like a tired trope of like the hero who gets his ass kicked all the time. And like you never really evolve beyond that. And then the one time that he does, the one time he actually shows character growth, he inexplicably just rises up and in the name of protecting his family who's in peril, he just like dismembers and kills Prince Goro just out of nowhere. But then he immediately goes back to being the lame guy who just gets tossed around the screen like a rag doll. And we talked about this a little bit before with Sonya Blade. Like the only thing that this guy has going for him is his genetics. The only reason that he is featured in this film, the only thing that places him in the main role of the film is his ancestry. Like it's just so disappointing. And you know, while I'm very happy that there was a lot of Asian representation on the screen, this is not the way to do it. You could have easily, just done better. I'm not saying that you have to cast a female in the role or anything like that. I'm just saying if you're going to take away from Sonya Blade, or you're going to take away from somebody who has more of a compelling backstory, just do it better. Like, he's like, just like, I feel like I've seen this in like a straight to Redbox DVD sequel of this MMA fighter who just like loses and loses and loses, and yet he's the chosen one. How, like, it's such a tired trope for me, and it was so disappointing. And I felt like the film could have been an absolute home run and like runaway winner for a lot of folks, critics and fans alike, if they would have just like done a better job with the person that they gave the most focus to.
Well, if I remember correctly, Cole Young is an original character for this movie. So he's not based on anything in particular out of the actual fighting games. And I think that shows, because he very much feels sort of like the odd man out. Like, did we really need yet another chosen one Hollywood movie? Have we not suffered enough through that tired old trope? But, let's say you want to do the old chosen one thing. Let's say that you want something that feels universal and timeless, and so you decide to go back to that. Well, fine. Make your chosen one actually interesting. You're exactly right in saying that the guy gets his butt kicked nonstop in this movie. It is absolutely bizarre how he never rises to the occasion. And his whole like part of the prophecy is that he's like going to rally, the other fighters and lead them to victory, blah, blah, blah. His genius plan is, let's take them on one by one. Like nobody else could have thought of that in the situation. Like, we needed Cole Young to say, let's take them down one by one. And you know what's really bizarre too is like everybody unlocks their special power, and then his is like friendship bracelet wraps my chest. And I was trying to kind of make sense of what his power was, because it's never explicitly stated. So he has this like armor over his arms and chest. And then when he's fighting Goro, like every punch kind of lights up, right? And so while I'm watching this, I'm thinking, oh, this is some kind of like, kinetic energy absorbing or something. Like he can absorb all the punches, he can take the beating, and then he can like reflect it back at them, like give that strength back at them. And in the Goro fight, that interpretation kind of makes sense. But then after that fight, you never quite see that again. So what's his power? I don't quite understand. He also comes across as extremely dense in a lot of places, particularly when it comes to this birthmark that mysteriously looks like, a dragon or something. Like, you never have an urge to try to figure out why you have a birthmark that literally has a very specific shape. Like, Google is a thing, Cole. Try it sometime. The writing on this character is incredibly bad. So although, I can't fault the actor, the portrayal, the acting is good. I just don't think he's given anything to work with in this movie. And it makes Cole in a lot of ways feel like, the third wheel on a bicycle. Like, it's just not necessary for this story, even though he's supposed to be the focal point. So I agree with you 100% wholeheartedly that the Cole character was probably the worst thing about the movie.
Yeah, so it's just really strange, and you add to the fact that we weren't really clear on his family dynamics until like 80% of the way through the film. Like, I really just thought that was his younger sister. She didn't say dad until like her life was in peril. So I thought that was like a sister and a niece. Like, I wasn't very clear. Like, just the writing on this, it's just wild to me that like, when you want to kind of really change up the story and the lore and make this movie your own, make it stand out as something starkly different from the 95 iteration, like, you really think that you would just do a better job of it. Like, it's just wild to me. Like, the entire character, if you take him out of the movie, I think it's a much better film.
I agree. And we've talked a lot about the idea of taking the source material and twisting it and bending it a little bit, and how we're generally open to that as long as it doesn't in any way, shape, or form betray the original intent or the tone of the thing that is being reinterpreted. But Cole as an addition just falls so flat. I don't think it necessarily betrays what Mortal Kombat is all about. But at the same time, it doesn't add anything substantial either. And that's a shame.
Yeah, and I think my biggest criticism, and I referenced this before, is it just feels so tone deaf in the age of women's empowerment, that you had a clear leading lady there in Sonya Blade, and you chose a male character just because he descended from Scorpion. Like, that was literally his only achievement, because he's sure as hell not a good fighter. Like, that it was literally the only thing, and it just felt like kind of like, congratulations, you played yourself, like a self-owning joke, that they really made this choice. So it was just really regrettable. All right, Dave, what is your first dislike for the film?
So you kind of stole mine because I wanted to talk about Cole as well. But now that we got that particular problem out of our system, let's talk about the whole mark thing, because I really dislike the rules of who got this dragon mark. The thing that showed that somebody was chosen as an Earthrealm defender. Why would this mark arbitrarily jump to the person who kills the chosen fighter? I mean, it makes no sense to me if, like, fate, destiny, the gods, whatever you want to say, if they chose a particular fighter as their champion, what is the point of then saying, oh, somebody killed that guy, let's go ahead and let that mark jump to that person? I mean, the champion that was initially chosen must have been chosen for a reason. And I would hope it's a reason that goes beyond he punches real hard. Like, there must be something intrinsically about the character, the personality, whatever. I mean, does this mean that, let's say, Sub-Zero kills Cole, he gets Cole's mark and has to fight for the Earthrealm suddenly? It's just weird. There's also something really disingenuous about this whole setup when pretty much all of the champions are only there because they killed somebody and stole that person's right to fight in the tournament. I mean, I'm pretty sure almost every single character that is in Raiden's temple at one point says in some way, shape, or form, I killed somebody and that's how I got this mark. Cole is literally the only person there who was born with it. So the whole thing seems incredibly odd. I mean, these are supposed to be the best that Earthrealm has to offer for defense, and instead they come across as a bunch of a-holes who killed the real defenders. And another problem with using the Mortal Kombat symbol as such a mark, and I mentioned this earlier, is that Cole comes across as a complete moron because he's, born with this thing. Sonya Blade, who doesn't even have the mark, has all this research on the symbol and what it means, and Cole, who was born with this weirdest possible birthmark ever, never thought to Google it. So yeah, the whole rules around the mark, that whole setup, I'm just not a fan.
Yeah, it's just really just like so arbitrary. It's just like this murderous game of hot potato going back and forth. Like,
Exactly.
yeah. So, like, I think like a much more interesting way to do it. I just got done playing Pokemon Sword, and like these like champions like chose like an up and coming trainer that they kind of gave their endorsement to. And I feel like that would have been much more compelling storyline. And then you could also lean into the lore, which is one of the criticisms that I'll have here in a moment. You can really lean into that lore and the mythology of Otherworld and the Elder Gods. If you have like all these Elder Gods and they seek out their champion, and like it's kind of like this team building kind of montage, I think that would be much, much more interesting and compelling than this whole Cole Young getting, himself the floor wiped with himself. So rather than just getting beat up and beat up and beat up. So I feel like it's just like a really kind of like a Looney Tunes type of setup of just like super cartoony and doesn't really make a whole lot of logical sense.
Yeah, you're exactly right, Chris. All right, Chris, what is your second dislike of Mortal Kombat?
They had a tournament without an actual tournament. Like, you'd say, like, it's fine if you want to do that. That's okay. But like, don't bury the lead like that. Like, this is the most important thing. If we lose one more tournament, Otherworld or Outworld, it's Outworld, right? I've been reading too many
Yes.
X-Men comics. It's Otherworld and the X-Men. Outworld will take over Earthrealm. Okay, well then let's have the freaking tournament. Like, so like don't like build it up to be this whole thing just to be so anticlimactic, and like you basically have a tournament happening before the tournament happens. Just it's just so weird. And I'm not like one of these people that's just like burdened by like hard fast rules, but don't like hype it up and then like not even deliver on it. Like it was just like a strange choice in my opinion.
That whole particular plan also was really really odd. So again, we have a problem, I think, with clearly defining rules here and making them make sense. So you have this tournament, and Earthrealm has to lose 10 in a row, and then Outworld gets to invade and take over. Okay, fine. So Outworld has won the last 9 tournaments, and this is the big fight, the 10th tournament that is going to allow them to, you know, invade Earth. That what apparently their big goal in this whole setup is. So then they just decide to throw the rule book out and, go off book. Why? What's the motivation there? You just won the last 9 tournaments. Earthrealm has not given you any indication that they're going to kick your butt number 10. Just do the tournament, win, and then, take over Earth. Like, I don't understand the reasoning behind this particular, like, okay, we're going to kill all the fighters and then we can't hold the tournament. Like, you want to hold the tournament. You are winning the tournaments. You're on the road to success. Plus, throwing out the rule book, makes you think somebody set this up, right? Somebody made these rules. They refer to them as the old gods or something, and Raiden is the only one of them that we see. But at some point, you would think maybe the old gods look down and are like, dude, you kind of like completely violated the rules. So you can't invade Earth because you didn't win the tournaments like you said you were supposed to. Like, it just doesn't make sense as a plan from the bad guys when they're already on the edge of victory. Now, if the roles were reversed and Earthrealm had been kicking butt this whole time, and one more tournament, and then they never have a chance to invade, then they can take desperate measures like this. But I don't understand why they would want to take desperate measures when they're not desperate, Kris.
Yeah, and I'm not sure. When it comes to American sports, I think you're kind of like not interested, Dave. But this is giving me serious New England Patriots vibes. And for people who don't follow the NFL, like the New England Patriots are like the most winningest franchise in all of American sports over the last 20 years or so. And they've been busted several times for like cheating infractions that really just don't make sense. Like one of the most recent ones, they lost draft picks because they were caught videotaping the Cincinnati Bengals practice. Now, to give some context, the Cincinnati Bengals at the time of this were like 1-12. So like, what are you doing? Like, you're clearly better than them. Like, why are you videotaping a team that has won 1 game and lost 12? So that's giving me the same kind of like same energy as the meme says. Also like it's just wild to me that they would just like jump in. Like, it feels like there's no stakes in this because we're just supposed to go from this beautiful opening sequence to just fast forward centuries. And oh, by the way, I know you didn't see any of these tournaments, but just take for granted the fact that, just take our word for it, that they've lost all 9 of them. Like, there's no montage, there's no like, just kind of like summary. I'm not saying that we have to make this a 3-hour film where we see all the results from the previous 9, but it's just completely out of nowhere. We're just supposed to take that and just run with it. So it's just like, it's just a mess when it comes to the actual framework for this thing.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. Just the rules are so ill defined, and the motivation doesn't quite make sense from the part of the bad guys.
All right, Dave, this next dislike, I think it's got you a little bit fired up. What's going on?
A while back, I went to see the theatrical Power Rangers reboot. And I know it was technically considered a failure, and many fans didn't like it. I have to admit, though, that I really did. There was something about that interpretation of the Power Rangers that resonated with me. I liked the movie, and I was looking forward to a sequel. I think it did a really good job establishing that world and setting up a really interesting franchise moving forward. It was, I guess, not meant to be because they're talking about rebooting the Power Rangers franchise yet again. So we'll see what comes out of that. Now, why am I talking about Power Rangers? Well, the biggest sin of that movie to me was the lame tease at the end of the movie of Tommy Oliver, without ever actually showing Tommy Oliver. Now, Tommy the Green Ranger and later the White Ranger, maybe the most popular Power Rangers character of all time. And all we got was a sequel tease for a movie that now will never happen. And I was pretty angry about that. And here we are again. Mortal Kombat without Johnny Cage, one of the most popular characters in the franchise. Cage, an actor who can actually fight, a smart aleck, cocky and hilarious with one-liners. He's an integral part of the Mortal Kombat franchise. Heck, he was one of the original 7 playable characters in the very first Mortal Kombat game. And here, all we got again was a last-minute tease at the end of the movie without ever showing him. He's kind of implied, and then it kind of goes over to a poster that doesn't actually show his face, just his name. Will there be a sequel to this movie? Will we ever actually get to see Johnny Cage in this particular world? Who knows? Because once again, Hollywood decides to sequel tease and hold something back rather than make the product that they're currently making the best possible product. Stop holding stuff back. Leave it all on the table. Give it your very best shot. All cards down. And then, if you convince your audience that what you produced is good, then worry about the sequel. Stop worrying about the sequel when you haven't even released the first movie yet. It really, really does, Chris, have me fired up.
Yeah, for sure. And I totally wholeheartedly agree. And I read in an interview as to why they changed so many different things, particularly the question of not having a tournament. And I forgot to reference this earlier in my point, but they said that they really wanted to make it starkly different from the 1995 film. And so I know that Johnny Cage was heavily featured in that, but it was one of the things that worked in the film. So why would you not want to transplant that? I mean, you could make an argument that outside of Scorpion and Sub-Zero, Johnny Cage is the most iconic Mortal Kombat character. Like, he's the most identifiable. Like, he's been featured, like, even in the 10 and 11 films, like, he's this old guy and he's still featured. Like, that's how compelling of a character he is. So to just do that, it just felt like in bad taste. And you know, we traded that in, you know, for Cole Young, who was just such a major flop. But yeah, so it was really disappointing. And I will wholeheartedly agree that I freaking love that Power Rangers film. And I was really, really angry when they canceled, you know, the planned sequel.
It just worked, man. I was so surprised, but, you know, kind of really leaning into the characters more. Even though we didn't get, you know, as much time with them in the suits and in fighting and everything, the characters were really compelling, well acted, and I think it showed a lot of promise for a really strong sequel. As does Mortal Kombat, by the way. I think there's good promise for a sequel here, but will we ever see it?
Let's go down the rabbit hole a little bit more. I did go into that movie with very low expectations. I think I watched it like 2 years after it came out, like on demand or something. And just like the whole of it, I was like, this is going to be terrible. But I will say that probably my favorite part of the film was Elizabeth Banks as Rita Repulsa. I didn't see that coming, and I was not anticipating enjoying her portrayal as much as I did.
Yeah, I agree. She was absolutely fantastic in that. It's just a really, really good villain. Just the right amount of cheese, let's put it that way. Like a good pizza, just the right amount of cheese.
I don't know, I like extra cheese.
All right, this brings us to your final dislike. Chris, what have you got?
So maybe I'm, you know, kind of, you know, expecting too much here, but like, as a huge fan of like the clans and the factions of Mortal Kombat, I wanted a little bit more kind of world building. So, you know, we had a lot of like Easter eggy type phrases and things for like fan service, but they didn't really have a whole lot of substance. Like, my personal favorite is, you know, when Sub-Zero says "for the Lin Kuei." But like, that means nothing if you're just coming to this film with no previous reference. Like, super fans of the franchise, or even moderate fans like myself, will get it. But like, so I really wish they would have done a little bit more of, you know, world building. And even as beautiful as that opening sequence was, I would have liked to have had a little bit more of a backstory into why they're fighting. Why are they warring? Even like if it's like a title crawl at the beginning, or like an opening paragraph like you see in a lot of films. So, you know, and then you have Kano reference the Black Dragons that, you know, isn't really explored. Maybe we'll see that more in the sequel. And, you know, maybe this is kind of morphing into my other dislike of the film that we've already kind of hinted at. is they put the cart before the horse when they're in terms of building towards a sequel that isn't even guaranteed yet. So I would have liked to seen a lot more world building, particularly with the clans and the factions.
I agree with that. Even Scorpion basically, looks at Sub-Zero in that opening sequence and says, I don't know what you're saying or who you are. And I'm like, well, I know what he's saying, but I don't know who he is either or why he attacked you. So there is a lot that needs to be, it's left to either interpretation. You kind of have to fill in the gaps yourself, or the movie presupposes a little bit too much fandom. And I think that's never a smart idea with a movie like this. A movie like this, the job is to appeal to as much of the casual audience as possible. You have to go, beyond the source material. As a filmmaker, it's your job to make a self-contained, accessible movie that can draw in new fans and casual audience members. And if you just leave that much up to basically filling in the gaps from the source material, you messed up. A little more clarity and information goes a long way.
Yeah, and I think it's a delicate balance because you don't want to like beat a dead horse, like, to full pun intended. Like, I saw a comedian was like, "Oh, another Batman movie. If I have to see Batman's daddy die one more time, like we've been, it's been done to death." I'm glad. In contrast, that with the recent Spider-Man films, I have my criticisms of them, but I'm glad that they didn't do the Uncle Ben thing again. And it's just implied, like, we get it. So I think it's a delicate balance. And I do subscribe to the theory of, Stan Lee or whoever said it, I think it was Stan, of, every comic can be someone's first comic. So I think you have to do a little bit of both, where you kind of like lay out the story, but you're not, just, doing it too much and laying it on too thick.
Yeah, exactly.
All right, Dave, what is your final dislike for this film?
So I just hinted at it, but it basically comes down to the whole Outworld problem. And I think it links in nicely with the whole, you want more clans and factions. I played a fair amount of Mortal Kombat in my time, so I was at least rudimentarily familiar with the lore. My wife, on the other hand, is not. She really called my attention to the problem, and that kind of just developed into a dislike. And that's, what the heck is up with Outworld? Who are these people? What is this place? The movie gives very little explanation of Outworld, of what it is, of who this guy is that runs it, or why he has a mad-on for Earth. After the opening sequence with Scorpion and Sub-Zero, we're introduced to Cold, and then suddenly, boom, Outworld. And it just, I don't know, man, it's some kind of hellscape, I guess, but there's zero indication or explanation. My wife just looked at me and cocked an eyebrow at that point, so I had to pause the movie and give her a quick primer on what Outworld is. And as I mentioned just a second ago, that is a bad mistake on the filmmaker's part. You can't expect people to know the source material. You want to draw in, new audience members, casual fans, people who never played the game. And when you're leaving that many gaps and you're leaving that many explanations out, you're not going to be able to do that. It's poor world building, Chris.
Yeah, I totally agree. And we talked a lot about this in our previous points, but one more thing I will say is, we live on Earth. We know what NetherRealm looks like. Like, one of the best things about being a fan of sci-fi or fantasy type of, media is that you get to explore these worlds that are fictional, that are, created in our heads. So, like, why would you not want to lean into that? And I understand, expense wise, but like, if you're doing heavy green screen stuff, like, why not spend more time there? And it's just more fun, in my opinion.
Yeah, I can 100% agree with that, Chris. All right. Well, that's it for the Byword Big Talk. Final verdict on Mortal Kombat, Chris. What do you think?
I think the strengths and the things that I enjoyed about it so much helped me overlook the things that I dislike. So I'm going B to B plus. What about you?
I think I'm right there with you. I think, B minus is kind of where I'm sitting with this. It was certainly entertaining. I had a really good time watching it. The action sequences were very good. There were characters for me to latch onto, even though it wasn't exactly the protagonist. My wife enjoyed it as well, as, somebody who'd never played the Mortal Kombat games and maybe, wasn't as disappointed with some of the oversights, like, for example, the lack of Johnny Cage. So, yeah, I think it was a really good time, Chris. All right, well, after our final break, it's time for some nerd commendations, so don't go anywhere, folks. We'll be right back. And we're back. Ladies and gentlemen, people, it's time for our nerd commendations, and Kris is going back to the Switch yet again. This system is just the gift that keeps on giving, Kris.
Yeah, so I've gone a little bit off the deep end when it comes to my stimulus check and that Nintendo Switch. But friends of the show know that I recently purchased a Switch, and I am making up for so much lost time. So the folks at GameStop told me that this was the latest Mario game, and I just, okay, cool, I got the new one. But Super Mario 3D World is actually a re-release from a Wii U game. So that was absolutely news to me because I never had a Wii U. So any of those games that were released on Wii U, I've never played them before. But this one, the re-release on the Switch of Super Mario 3D World plus Bowser's Fury is just probably the most fun that I've had outside of Breath of the Wild, because that's an untouchable stratosphere. We can't even get there. This is the most non-Breath of the Wild fun that I've had playing the Switch. It just combines all the elements of a franchise that I, carry close and near and dear to my heart. It is basically like Super Mario Brothers, like those A to B, point A to point B type destination games. But you kind of combine it with the gameplay factors of things like Mario Galaxy or Mario 64, where you have the 3D element and you just kind of, go around all this world. And then you add the addition of Bowser's Fury, which is an update, is basically, for all intents and purposes, like a DLC portion of the game. I had a free day yesterday, and I beat most of the Bowser's Fury part yesterday, but it was playing several hours. I love this game. It's one of those ones where you look up and what have I been doing for 8 hours? Like I enjoy it so much. My only criticism is what I have with a lot of the Mario Brothers content is in the Bowser's Fury part, I can't play with Luigi. Now, the Mario 3D World part, the main portion of the game, you can be Luigi, you can be Princess Peach, you can even unlock Rosalina at one point. But this is just so much fun playing this game. And I just wish that we had more Luigi content. I haven't played the Luigi's Mansions games yet. I don't know if that's really my cup of tea. But I'm definitely going to look to give it a shot because I love Luigi. I think I told you this yesterday when we were texting in prep for the show. I used to play Super Mario World. Remember my first video game? I would play it as 2-player mode and just intentionally run off a cliff with one player just so I could play with Luigi. Love some Luigi, and I need more Luigi in my life. But Super Mario 3D World plus Bowser's Fury, if you have a Switch, definitely check this one out. And I'm just having the best time, rediscovering my love for Nintendo games. So this has just been one of the most fun experiences of my video gaming life.
I played this one without the Bowser's Fury update a little bit on the old Wii U that I still have plugged up in my gaming room. Underrated console that just got the short end of the stick in some ways. And I'll wholeheartedly echo your nerd commendation. The base game is actually really, really good. The idea of marrying this, the 3D space with gameplay elements that are more reminiscent of, some of the 2D Mario games works incredibly well. This is also the game, I believe, that has the cat suit. Is that correct, Kris?
Yes, it's the best. It's my favorite power-up.
Yes. It's probably the best power-up since the raccoon power-up in Super Mario Bros. 3. It works incredibly well. It's as far as power-ups go, really a game changer and probably the most innovative power-up I think we've seen in a Mario game in quite a while. So everything about this game just kind of sings. It's a lot of fun, and I'm totally planning on replaying it for Switch at some point.
All right, Dave, your nerd commendation is, it was absolute news to me, and I'm ready to order a copy, like, immediately, before you even say anything.
All right, well, I think you're going to like this. So I want to talk about a book called A Kid's Guide to Fandom by Amy Radcliffe. I recently wrote a review for the Nerd Daily about this book, and I have to say, it's absolutely fantastic. So, A Kid's Guide to Fandom sets out to be a primer for children who want to turn their love of a particular fictional universe into action. It's really, above all else, about doing something, about taking action with your fandom, not just enjoying a TV show or a movie or a comic book, but channeling that love that children feel for those stories into something creative and fun. It's basically about sparking inspiration. And the book focuses on stuff like, how do you get into fan fiction? What is fan fiction? How do you get into fan art? And what is even fan art? What are podcasts and how can, a kid start a podcast? It talks about fanzines and how to make your own little magazine, cosplay and how to get started in cosplay, very simply. And then how can you get more complex? It talks about gaming and how to, join communities that are into these kinds of things and that are, in your age group. So I found the book to be a fantastic way to help kids express their love of nerdy stuff. How do you get into cosplay, into fan fiction, into podcasts? With so many possibilities and technology really having leveled the playing field, kids have the chance to express themselves really like I think never before in history. And so the book is, I think, very much needed, especially as sort of nerd culture has exploded and become much more relevant to popular culture. The book also features art from Dave Perillo. It's really sort of a retro cool that really adds a lot to the book and sort of illustrates, cartoony children doing various things like podcasting and playing games and stuff. And then there's a healthy helping of interviews with experts, actual cosplayers, people who've written fan fiction, podcasters. And basically what you have here is just a fantastic primer for kids on how to be a fan and express your fandom. So yeah, man, I really enjoyed this. Shout out to the Nerd Daily for getting an advanced reader copy into my hands for the review. And the book, I believe, is set to be released on May 11th. So it's only about a week or so away.
Yeah, like I said, I'm super excited about this, especially with having so many of my children that are interested in nerdy things, particularly like Minecraft and to a lesser degree Fortnite. They've kind of jumped ship to Minecraft here recently, but what I love about this is I think it's really a healthy bridge to fandom for kids and like creating safe places. One of my biggest criticisms of nerd culture is how toxic and segregated it's become and so hateful. So I'm glad to see that like at a young age, we're seeing healthy ways to express the things that you love. Like last week, I took my son to get his haircut at the barbershop, and the kid in line before us was just raving about, and the kid probably had to be 11 or 12, was just raving about his Minecraft YouTube channel. And just like that innocence and that just pure love for something, it was just so endearing, and it just made me smile. So I'm so happy to see this, and I'm definitely ordering a copy for my kids.
Yeah, absolutely. It's highly recommended. It's really good. A great starting point for basically being a fan. All right, folks, that's it for another episode of the Nerd Byword podcast. Thank you so much for joining us. Please be sure, if you enjoy the show, to drop us a rating and review on your favorite podcasting platform. We are, of course, available wherever podcasts can be found. Apple Podcasts, of course, Spotify, TuneIn Radio, on our very own website, of course, also, nerdbyword.com.
You can also hang out with us on social media, Instagram and Twitter, both at Nerd by Word, and individually at That Nerd Dave and That Nerd Kris, respectively. And as always, stay well and stay nerdy.
The Nerd Byword is written and produced by Kris and Dave, two nerds with a love of all things pop culture. The podcast features music by Al Jimenez and show art by Ashery Design. Find us at nerdbyword.com and wherever podcasts are available.